The next question says, which of the following can best be inferred from the passage about the stages of enlightenment? Before we aim to answer this question, let's go back to paragraph 3 and read what is written about the three stages of enlightenment. Enlightenment involves three stages. First comes self-emancipation, where a categorical imperative of thinking is required to overcome the laziness which leads to the inability to use one's reason. Second is a political and social emancipation. Society's impositions can create a state of immaturity. Therefore, social and intellectual inhibitions must be eliminated and political freedom must be increased, so one can achieve enlightenment through the use of one's reason. Third is cultural emancipation, which stipulates that the emergence from immaturity is a historically progressive process which is achieved on a personal level. Now let's go back to the options. Option A says enlightenment leads to emancipation of humankind. Although the passage talks about emancipation of self and societal emancipation, it does not say that emancipation of humankind as a whole will happen at the time of enlightenment. So you might have progressive emancipation of self, and you might witness changes in society, but humanity as a whole will not change or will not get emancipated in the age of enlightenment. Hence, option A can be eliminated. Option B says enlightenment is a process of self-realization of individual as well as of society. This can be inferred as a possible result of enlightenment, but this is not specifically mentioned in the passage, and hence we'll have to eliminate this. Option C says they help to overcome the inhibitions that an individual would have developed over the years. Now, passage says that in the third stage, in the second stage of enlightenment, inhibitions must be taken care of so that freedom of speech is allowed, freedom of thought is allowed, and reason can be used. This does not mean that the age of enlightenment helps a person to overcome inhibitions or gives him courage to overcome inhibitions. It is a process where through reason we overcome inhibitions, and that is called the second stage of enlightenment. Hence, option C, because of its wordings, can be eliminated. Option D says the initial stage is imperative for personal growth that eventually leads to social progress for the individual. That's correct, as the passage already states that the first comes self-emancipation, where the categorical imperative of thinking is required to overcome the laziness which leads to inability to use one's reason. Hence, the initial stage is important for personal growth and eventually for societal progress. Hence, option D will become the correct answer. Let's look at the next question. From the argument in the third paragraph, it can be inferred that. Let's look at each option individually. Option A says if the state were to curtail the freedom of an individual, it could curtail the right to debate and engage in critical discourse. Now, this is correct, as paragraph 3, last few lines of paragraph 3, they say that as long as the subject performs his duties to the state in the private sphere, he may emerge in critical discourse in public sphere. According to Kant, freedom to publish and debate publicly would gradually enable people to develop the tendency to free thought. Once developed, this affects the character of the people, who gradually become more capable of free action, which would eventually influence government. Intellectual freedom must therefore precede and prepare the way for greater political and civil freedom, or in other words, enlightenment. Now, option A says that if a state were to curtail freedom of individual, it will curtail right to debate and engage in critical discourse. That's exactly what is given in the passage also, that if freedom of an individual is not curtailed, then he would be able to engage in critical discourse, which would essentially lead to the effect on government and life in general. And hence, option A is correct. Let's look at other options also. Option B says if a person conforms to the requirement of the state, he is allowed to engage in critical discussions at various levels. Although the passage states that as long as subject performs the duties of the state in the private sphere, that does not necessarily mean conforming to the requirements of state. That just means fulfilling the duties which are there of an individual towards the state. Hence, option B cannot be correct. Option C says the ability to engage in critical discourse can help a person develop the tendency of free thought. This is correct, as the author says that critical discourse would essentially lead to free thought. But the passage does not talk of ability but of freedom of doing it. So the word ability in option C makes it incorrect. Had it been that the freedom to engage in the critical discourse will propel a person the tendency of free thought, then it would have been correct. So we cannot take option C as it is given right now. Option D says that the argument for autonomy also pertains to the freedom to engage in critical discourse. The argument for autonomy is a too specific argument which the passage has not addressed. The passage only says that if you fulfill your duties towards state, then you also will get the freedom to engage in political discourse, and which can essentially lead to a freedom of thought that will affect the government. Hence, option D will also become incorrect. The correct answer to this question will become option A.